of me getting already converted people that believe in Bitcoin onto the show. We'll certainly have some of those. I wanted to also bring in people from the traditional world so that we can get a perspective of how they think, and we can get different angles, because I think it's always good to question your beliefs so that you can actually strengthen your beliefs if you still believe in that way, or whether we can make Bitcoin better by actually understanding some of the things ahead. So this very first episode, I got Mr. Jim Rogers, who I did a tour with in China. I was giving the Bitcoin talk, he was giving the China America talk, and we got to spend a lot of time together. And so I thought he would be a great person to get on the show, because he actually gave a comment recently that he believes that Bitcoin's going to zero. So I wanted to understand a bit more, dive a bit deeper. And so we're going to now move over to the interview, the very first episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk. For those of you not familiar with Jim Rogers, he's a billionaire investor that's actually traveled over 340,000 miles, 6 continents, 116 countries, and actually got him in the Guinness Book of Records twice. He wrote 2 books on his adventures, Investment Biker and Adventure Capitalist. He's the co-founder of the Quantum Fund with billionaire investor George Soros, and he's the creator of the Rogers International Commodity Index as a very successful commodities trader. Hello everybody, Simon Dixon here from Bitcoin Hard Talk, where we have hard talk about hard money. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Jim Rogers. We first met in China when we were doing a tour, and I've been studying Mr. Rogers' work for a very long time. Read his book, Investment Biker, which took a whole tour around the world, which was a very fascinating book I'd recommend to all, and there's been many books since. Today we're going to discuss, try and get a perspective from Mr. Jim Rogers on what he's seeing today. But just before I do that, for those that are not too familiar with your investment approach, I guess my summary of Mr. Rogers' investment approach is looking for cheap things in game-changing scenarios. So if a country looks like it's shifting from communism to capitalism, and there might be some bargains as a result of a communist policy. Is that correct, Jim? How would you summarize your investing work over the years?
Well, Simon, I can see why you have a show. You said it better than I did. All I would say is I try to find things that are cheap where there's change taking place. But boy, you're good at this.
Brilliant. Okay. So when you see the, I guess one of the things that's coming at the moment is if we're moving into a recession and a depression, which it seems like we're moving that way, the phrase that you always get is cash is king. Now, one of the things that's not captured in that phrase is which cash. So what do you think, which type of cash would you be holding right now, and which cash might be king?
Great insight. I would remind you that in 2007, a lot of people said there's going to be a gigantic problem. So they put all their money into cash in Icelandic krona, because it was yielding very high rates of interest. And of course, Iceland went bankrupt and they lost their shares. So you got to have the right cash if you're going to put your money into cash. There are hundreds of, well, dozens, scores anyway, of kinds of cash out there. At the moment, I mainly own US dollars. Now, I hope you're going to say, what? Why? But the United States is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and it's getting worse every day, Simon. So why do I own it? Because around the world, most currencies are suspect now. And in times of trauma, times of crisis, people look for a safe haven. They think, for historic reasons, that the US dollar is a safe haven. It's not. It's not the largest debtor nation in the world, but people think it is. So I own a lot of US dollars. It's going to get overpriced. It might even turn into a bubble. And at which point I hope I'm smart enough to sell my US dollars and put the money elsewhere.
Okay, so when we were in the China tour, which seems like a lifetime ago at the moment, with so much has happened since, you were very bullish on China, and you were making investments in Russia. Do you still hold that view?
Well, yeah, what my view was and is that China is going to be the most important country in the 21st century. I mean, look out the window. Well, you can't look out the window there, but where we were before, you could see what's happening in China, and it will continue to happen. There will certainly be many setbacks along the way. I mean, the United States had huge setbacks as it became the most important country in the 20th century. UK had huge setbacks as it became the most important country in the 19th century. So sure, China's going to have a lot of problems, but I don't see anybody else on the horizon. I do own shares in Russia. Russia was certainly hated back in those days. I bought more Russian shares. I bought more Chinese shares recently. So yes, I continue to invest in both of those places.
Okay, and obviously with the cash situation at the moment, there's it seems like the countries with the highest levels of debt are still being considered safe havens. So in 2007 we had an issue with too much debt. And yet the Federal Reserve has got a lot more debt. Japanese people. Why do we look at what's going wrong here, and why is this happening?
Well, that's why there are always opportunities in the world, especially in the investment world, because most people look back instead of looking forward. And the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency for 70, 80 years now. And the Japanese yen was a great currency for a while. Went up a great deal. Japan was soundly financed. So people don't keep up, or they don't do their homework or whatever. I mean, Japan is a disaster. Yes, I've written 3 books now in Japan about what the gigantic problems come in. But people don't think about it. They don't do their homework. I don't know. Maybe they should watch your show to keep up with things. But people don't understand that the United States is going over a cliff. I hope I get it right. I own the US dollar. I hope I have enough sense to get out in time. But people own the Swiss franc. Oh my God! When I was a kid, the Swiss franc was the paragon of virtue. Now the Swiss franc is backed by Amazon and Google and Netflix. I mean, it's astonishing how countries can change.
Yeah, so I mean, Swiss franc is really interesting that we've now reached a day and age when central banks are buying foreign stocks, and maybe that how is one meant to even understand markets at the moment? So the bond market seems like it's in a bubble with low yields. Yet, if the whole world owns dollars, then they obviously want yields, and so they're buying treasuries. If the stocks just seem completely pumped up by central banks and quantitative easing. So how is one meant to actually, it seems like the markets are politics now and they're no longer the markets.
Well, very insightful. Yeah, again, look out the window. Everywhere in the world is doing it. Central bankers right now, if you look to your right or to your left, they're out there cranking up the printing presses as fast as they can, whether it's Japan or America, wherever it is, and they're putting all that money into markets. And that's why markets are up so much. You said something like, seems like bonds are in a bubble. Simon, this is a bubble. This is a real bubble. Interest rates are zero. They never, and below zero in some countries. This has never happened in recorded history. It doesn't seem like a bubble. It is a bubble. You're looking at a bubble, looking you in the eye. Shares.
The 10-year period from 08
shares, some shares are in bubble kind of territory. As I look around the world, the only asset class I see that's cheap, or the cheapest asset class, I should say, are commodities, real assets, especially agriculture, because it's a disaster. Sugar is down 80% from its all-time high. That was not a typo, Simon. 80% from its all-time high. So, there may be opportunities out there, but it's certainly not in the bond market.
Okay. So commodities seems to be where you're looking for your value right now. Are there any countries that you think are driving like value opportunities at the moment, or is it kind of too early to buy, too late to sell type scenario?
Well, I mentioned I bought Chinese shares recently. I bought Russian shares recently. I bought Japanese ETFs a week or two ago. Japan's a disaster. I've written several books about the disaster in Japan. But Simon, the head of the central bank, goes to work every morning, goes in early, cranks up the printing press, starts printing. He buys index futures. He buys ETFs. He buys stocks. I gave him permission to buy stocks too. He has more money than I do, Simon. If he's going to buy ETFs, I bought ETFs. It's not good for Japan. It's not good for the world. But that's what he's doing. So I joined in too.
So let's switch gears slightly. We're talking about commodities and central banks buying assets. I've been given some crazy theories over the years, and people have often thought I'm a little bit crazy in terms of some of the things that I can imagine happening. But one of the scenarios is that I feel like Bitcoin has reached commodity-like status in our bubble. I speak to traditional investors like you that have always thought outside the box because we are in our own little Bitcoin bubble, and I like to be
Yes.
And I like to be sanity checked by people that have many decades more investing experience. But if the Swiss central bank is able to buy stocks, and we enter a time of, which it seems like we are right now, where there may be a Bretton Woods style renegotiation of money, is it inconceivable that central banks might, not the big ones obviously, but smaller central banks in a game of trying to conceive power, might make an asymmetric bet by announcing that they're holding some Bitcoin as a reserve? How do you see a scenario like that playing out?
Simon, anything is possible. I'm older than you, but I've read a lot of history. It's a shock and stunning what bureaucrats and politicians and central banks can do. It's just amazing. You read back over some history and you say, how did they do that? How could they, 20 years from now, we're going to look back and say, how could interest rates have been negative? Never happened in history. And there for a period, all over the world, people accepted negative interest rates. So it's stunning what people have done in history and what they can do and will do. Yes, anything is possible. Anything is possible. Is it going to be Bitcoin? Who knows? Why not? But I would suspect not. But we will see. As you and I, we have discussed recently, but as you know, many cryptocurrencies have already disappeared, Simon. There were thousands at one time. Many of them have already gone to zero and disappeared. And as you know, I guess we're going to come to this later. I expect all of them to go to zero eventually, including Bitcoin.
Yeah, let's dive straight into that then. So from our perspective, Bitcoin is very different to every other cryptocurrency that was created since. It's like...
Stop right there for a second. You just said very dangerous things. Some of the most dangerous words in the investment business are, it's different this time. Be very careful when you hear you're saying it's different this time. Go ahead, I'll listen.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have warned about that constantly in your work, that you know you're in a crazy scenario when you're saying this time is different. But this time is different. In terms of Bitcoin, we see it as kind of like gold is very different to other commodities. We see Bitcoin as very different to other cryptocurrencies for various reasons, just in terms of its the properties behind it. So you see it going to zero. Help us understand what you're seeing that we're not seeing.
Well, for thousands of years, people have used whatever they wanted as money. Seashells, sugar cubes, cattle, gold, silver. 100 years ago, banks could print their own money legally. If you were a bank in Germany, you printed your own money. No, it was legal to do so, or England or elsewhere. Then in the 1930s, the Bank of England, which was the most important bank in the world at the time, said, from now on, it is an act of treason if you use anything for money except our money. Well, Simon, treason means they execute you. So people stopped using other forms of money because nobody wanted to be executed. And that's what's going to happen again. I know all of you guys in the crypto world are smarter than the bank, smarter than the governments. You know you're smarter than the government. I know you're smarter than the government. But Simon, they have the guns. They all have the guns. And when the Bank of England said it's treason, people stopped using other money. And when the Bank of whoever or banks of whoever says it's treason, people are going to stop using alternative currencies. Now, yes, money is going to be on the computer. There is no question. Money is going to be on the internet, but it's going to be their money. In China, Simon, it's already, China's already come up with their own computer money. But even before that, when it was renminbi, you can't take a taxi in China with money now. With renminbi, Chinese legal money, you cannot take a taxi, you cannot buy ice cream. You got to have your money on the computer, or you can't do it. And now the Chinese have come up with their own crypto money, if you want to call it that, but it's their crypto money. And you think what you want. We all can think what we want, but I suspect that 8 years from now, 8 months from now, 3 years from now, you're not going to be able to go into China and use anything except their crypto money. And that's going to spread to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah, we're certainly aligned with countries going to be creating their own central bank digital currencies. They have been. That's been on the cards for a long time. And I think in a money printing environment, I think a central bank digital currency could end up being used instead of a bank bailout to try and recapitalize the system. I think the difference, well, there's a couple of assumptions there. I think that the first assumption is that all governments will make Bitcoin illegal. Now, what we have seen is that in the past, gold ownership was made illegal in America. So I believe, Jim, from your own experience, you went to Canada and Switzerland to acquire your gold. And so while there is a market for it in another country, surely there will be a price for it and a demand for it.
Well, yes, there's no question. And if what you just said is true, but if people were looking for something else, with all due respect, why wouldn't they go to another country and buy gold? Why would they go and buy Bitcoin? Bitcoin they can only use on a computer, and if the computers are down or something's wrong, what good's it going to do you? If you go to Canada and buy Bitcoin and then go back to America, I'm using those two countries, and you cannot use Bitcoin on your computer system in America, what good does it do you? At least I could take my gold back to America in my pocket.
Yes, certainly.
I work that way, Simon. I'm not nearly as computer literate as you are.
Sure.
By the way, I don't particularly like the fact that the governments have the guns. I don't like the fact that the governments want this. But Simon, you have to remember, they love it. It gives them complete control. They will know everything you ever do. They can call you up one day and say, Simon, you've had too much coffee this month. Stop drinking so much coffee. They will know everything about you. And they think that's wonderful. Plus, computer money is a lot cheaper for them. They don't have to print it. They don't have to transport it. They don't have to account for it. No, they love this. So it's going to become every government. You said some small governments might try X or try Bitcoin. Why? It's so much simpler just to use computer money. So
there's a couple of things there. So on the individual level, the case for gold is clear. Like, if people don't have gold, that's an essential part of everyone's survival mechanism, especially in today's economies. But one of the challenges, Jim, you're in Singapore. I'm sure that your gold is pretty close to you. But in the time of a lockdown, when you really need your gold, you can't. You're not going to be, probably the time you need your gold, you're not going to be able to fly over to Switzerland or fly over to Singapore if you're not there. And that's the time when digital money becomes an important hedge against gold. So it's not that it's one or the other. It's you want some hard money that works when the internet goes down, but you also want some hard money that works when you can't access your gold, which is the time when you probably really need hard money.
Hooray. I hope it happens, Simon. But again, I know how these guys think, and they think we've got the guns and we're not going to let those guys get away with it.
Yeah. So Jim, you literally rode a motorcycle around the world to experience all different cultures, all different ways of organizing countries. When you see a country like, maybe you've been there, I haven't been there, but when you see a country like Lebanon at the moment, what these countries do have is they do have electricity. And if your currency is in ruin and you wanted to actually so one of the things that actually happened is Bulgaria actually confiscated 200,000 Bitcoins from a criminal organization. And those Bitcoins are actually worth greater than their entire national debt. Obviously, through crony capitalism, through crony politicians, the Bitcoins just disappeared and they didn't make their way to the government's balance sheet. But if I were a country like Lebanon, thinking how they think, I try and take an asymmetric bet. I try and recapitalize, and I try and gain some more power by announcing that they're adding something like Bitcoin as a reserve asset, and they're dedicating some of their electricity.
Well, by all means, if that's your view and you can persuade them, have at it. Let them do it. My rejoinder to that is, looking at history, is that, okay, so Lebanon does that. Then what? If they need to go to France and buy corn or maize, what are they going to do? Maybe they can get some French farmers to take their Bitcoins. Maybe, I don't know. And then they got to get the shippers to take the ships to take the Bitcoin as well. Maybe it will happen that way. If I were the Lebanese looking for maize, I would take some gold. I would take some silver.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess the difference there is that they've got to try and acquire the silver with their Lebanese, or the gold and silver with their currency that no one wants.
But the same would apply. If they wanted to buy Bitcoin, they got to acquire it with something. You're suggesting they just acquire it with their electricity? They can make their own?
Yeah, the way that Bitcoin works is you can mine it, which is running.
Yeah. No, I know. So you're suggesting that Lebanon would just sit down and say, okay, well, let's mine some Bitcoin and go to France and buy maize.
I'm suggesting that's what I would do if I were them, but I don't know if they're going to listen to me.
Okay, well, nor me.
Yeah. So that's why
I'll listen to you. Maybe nobody else will listen to you and me, but we can listen to each other.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love your philosophy, Jim, when it comes to investing. You've always said, invest in things you know and understand. Don't listen to me, educate yourself. I'm not going to tell you, what works for me may not work for you because you don't understand the reasons why I'm investing, and we might have different time frames. And what do you suggest to people that, are watching shows like this and just constantly looking for, what does Simon Dixon say I should be buying? What does Jim Rogers say I should be buying?
Well, I will say it again, and you said it very eloquently again. Don't listen to me. You can listen to Simon if you want to. I can tell you what I'm doing, but don't do it because I'm doing it. As you can see, I have some gold right here. I'm like all the other peasants in the world. All of us peasants know that when things go wrong, we ought to have some gold. And some of us peasants might even be able to make money if we get our timing right. Some of us peasants also have silver. Silver right now is actually a lot cheaper than gold on a historic basis. So I own gold and silver. I'm not buying right now because in Asia, a lot of people are dumping their gold and silver to buy food, because they're hard times. But I hope I get it right and I can buy more gold and silver. I own a lot of US dollars. I've mentioned that before. I bought Chinese shares recently. I bought Russian shares. I bought the Japanese shares. I'm not buying US shares because they're at an all-time high. I'm not buying any bonds. Bonds are a bubble nearly everywhere in the world. So these are some of the things that I'm doing. But Simon, if people cannot find Russia on a map, I hope they don't go buy Russian shares. If they don't know how to buy Russian shares, don't go buying Russian shares because you saw some guy on the internet saying he bought Russia. Only stay with what you know. And if you know everything about Bitcoin and you actually know it's going to be great, do it. I tell you, you're going to go bankrupt, but don't listen to me. Do it your own way.
Yeah. And I do remember when we met, we were in the midst of the 2017 bubble when Bitcoin was up to 20,000, and you were saying the future of money is certainly digital, but this is a bubble if there ever is one. So.
Please, let me just tell you, I make lots of mistakes. I make plenty of mistakes. So I don't know, at that time, maybe I got something right, but I get plenty wrong.
Yeah. And you're willing to admit it, which is great. That's a rare commodity, as it were, online at the moment. So switching gears slightly, Jim, you came from humble beginnings, and you made all your own wealth, through the markets and through different decisions that you made. People are listening to us, and we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about commodities, but the vast majority of the world are just living month to month right now, and can't even, you talked about markets crashing because everyone needs cash just to buy their food. In those early days when you didn't have money, what advice could you give to people that are in this situation, living month to month? They want to start investing, but they just can't get on the right side of this debt cycle. Well,
I told you about some of my mistakes. You reminded me of my first wife. My first wife always wanted to spend. I kept saying to her, she wanted a sofa. I said, let's save our money and put it in the market. We can have 10 sofas someday. That's why she's no longer my wife, because we had a whole different attitude. But basically, you better learn to save. You better learn to accumulate some capital one way or the other, because without some capital, you're not going to be able to invest. You don't have to have a lot, but you've got to have some if you want to be an investor. Or you can do it with sweat equity, which means start with your own hands and your own work, whatever your idea is. I mean, I met a Chinese guy once who started out selling bread to farmers early in the morning at 6 in the morning. This was the early days when China was turning from communist to capitalist. He got up early every morning, made bread, sold it to the farmers. Now he's a very rich guy. That was his sweat equity, if you will. He didn't have any capital, but he knew how to make bread and he had a good idea. And so that was how he built up capital. But you got to have something, either a great idea that you can do without capital. You got to have capital. You're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, that's the way the world is. Lots of people have tried to change that, including lots of communists. Well, communism didn't work. Socialism didn't work. So the only thing I can tell you to do is figure out a fabulous idea that you can do without money, like selling bread to farmers at 6 in the morning in China, or save some money and start investing.
Yeah, spend less you earn, invest the difference. But when our role model of the world is the government right now, how are they doing at spending less than they earn and investing the difference? What would you recommend to governments with these levels of debt today?
Government's not my role model. You say government's a role model. If government is your role model, I suspect you would go down and get a job at the post office, because that's not a very good role model. As you just pointed out, they all have gigantic debts. They're all going deeper and deeper into debt every day. I urge you not, unless you can find somebody who's going to lend you endless amounts of money. If you can find somebody who will lend you endless amounts of money, take it and start investing it some way. But that's not going to last very long.
Yeah. So you see strengthening dollar as a result of these trends. And where do you see this end? Like, can the dollar just carry on doing what it's doing? Can it carry on? What do you see next? What's the change here?
Well, what I see is that when turmoil returns, I mean, there's turmoil. As the turmoil develops, and there's going to be more turmoil before this is over, more and more people will flee to a safe haven, and they think the U.S. dollar is a safe haven. And the U.S. dollar is going to get overpriced. It could turn into a bubble, depending on how bad the turmoil becomes. And I hope when that happens, my plan is to sell my U.S. dollars and put them somewhere else. Maybe, who knows, maybe I'll put it into gold. Historically, if the dollar gets very, very strong, often gold and silver have gone down, or at least gone down, have not gone up as much as the dollar has. Maybe I'll put it into gold and silver. Maybe China might make its currency convertible by then, and especially if they have it on the computer, then maybe I'll put my money into the Chinese renminbi then, or the Chinese computer money, whatever it's called. I don't know what I'll do, Simon. I have to wait till we get there.
Yeah, my guess is you'll look for something a bit more privacy enhancing than China's digital currency, which I think could be one of the biggest threats to freedom, prosperity, and personal privacy that we've ever seen.
But Simon, it's going to be everywhere. All governments are going to love it. Because they will have total control over everybody. They will know who your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whatever you have. They'll know, if you've been drinking too much, they'll know everything. And they love that. That gives government, that's a dream for those guys.
So I think we're on the same page that the individual would find a demand for Bitcoin, but the bit that you think is that the governments will just stop that, and then that puts an end to that one.
I've made many mistakes in my life, Simon. You have a different view. That's my view. And especially since Bitcoin does require electricity, or does require the computer. And the computer, of course, requires electricity. So you have to have the internet and you have to have electricity to have Bitcoins. Maybe it will work. But us peasants have a little gold in our pocket. And we're going to sew some silver into our lining, just in case. I cannot sew electricity into my jacket. I cannot sew the internet into my coat.
So Jim, in all of your travels and experience of motorcycling around the whole world, is this a new one for you? Have you ever seen an economy on lockdown like this before? Is this a new lesson for you, or have you seen this before?
Well, I've been through war zones, yes, and war zones were not a lot of fun. They were somewhat similar, but nothing like this. Simon, we've had epidemics throughout history, several in the last century, and this century even, we've had epidemics, but never before has the whole world closed down. Never before did McDonald's close because of an epidemic. Never before did all the airlines close because of an epidemic. This time around, it seems, looking back on it, that either the media or politicians or somebody got all hysterical and said the only solution is to close down. And they did. And so then it swept all the other politicians who felt they had to do something. But as I say, this never happened before. There was something 100 years ago called the Spanish flu, which, by the way, started in America, but they called it the Spanish flu. They had good PR. They didn't close the world down. In 2009 in America, we had something called the H1N1 virus. We didn't close McDonald's. We didn't stop going to football games. The whole world continued. This is the only time in history that we've closed everything down. And it seems to me that, sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. And it seems to me that this is another case where the cure is worse than the disease.
So when we first met, I was in Hong Kong, you were in Singapore, and Hong Kong seemed like the right place for me at the time. And then a year later, it really didn't. And there's been a lot of rivalry between Hong Kong and Singapore. How have you seen Singapore's reaction to the current situation? And how do you see Hong Kong at the moment?
Well, I don't think Hong Kong completely closed down ever. If it did, it didn't close for a long period of time. Singapore was doing a brilliant job. Then Singapore closed down everything and things got worse. I would not have done it the Singapore way, but who cares? I will know in 5 or 10 years which way was the right way. Sweden didn't close down. Belarus did not close down. 8 American states did not close down. Well, we'll know. The Swedes will say, yeah, we're suffering more now, but when the second or third wave comes, we're going to be better off than all of you who closed down. I have no idea. We'll see. I would have taken the Swedish way or the Belarus way and not closed down. And because people are not dumb. If you tell everybody there's an epidemic going around, people are not going to go down to the bar and chat up the girls and drink a lot of whiskey with strangers and shake a lot of hands and kiss everybody in sight. People are smarter than that. So I would have let people take their course. But again, nobody's going to listen to me, Simon. But that's what I would have done. If we don't know, we'll know in a few years who would have been right.
Okay. So we're drawing to the end of the interview. I think it's been incredibly insightful. Thank you for your time. Why don't you share a little bit about what's exciting you at your stage of life now, Jim? Are you still deep in the markets? Are you reaching a stage when other things are more important to you? What excites you now?
Well, I never had children, Simon. I was very much against children. I thought children were a horrible waste of time, and I felt so sorry for people who wasted their lives having children. And then I finally had one. I was 60 when I had my first child, and I found out I was completely wrong about children. I now have 2 daughters, and they're the most important thing for me. I do as much as I can for them. If I'd had children earlier, it would have been a mistake. But finally, after I've just sown a lot of wild oats, I drove around the world twice. I got a lot of stuff out of my system. Right now, my most important thing in life is my 2 little girls.
Yeah. And you're protecting their future, if I remember, by making sure they speak Mandarin. And they gave an incredible speech on video to the big audience in China, and they were amazed at how fluent your daughter was.
Well, they have done it more than once, and there's nothing to do with me. I speak no Mandarin. I don't think I know what I'm doing, but my 2 daughters somehow shocked the Chinese because their Mandarin is so good. They've done TV specials about my daughters, but something has nothing to do with me. I can't speak a word of Mandarin. So they did it. I didn't do it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jim Rogers. We'd love to do it again and review, what's coming up. It seems like there's so many world events happening right now. It's such an exciting time to be in the markets, but for some people, it's a very scary time. So what's the final thought you would leave people with that are kind of trying to make sense of this right now?
My final thought is wash your hands. Go wash your hands, Simon. Okay. Wear your mask.
Buy hand sanitizers.
If you don't have one, wash your hands.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We're